only to propose this motion, this House would ban political parties that use ethnicity as the basis of their political agenda. The reason why the government sees this as so important for a government to do is that we believe that it's the government's job to unite a country, and it's their job to prevent things from happening, which is our two main arguments, which is segregation and discrimination. Therefore, we mean that it's important that it's the government's job to ban these parties because we believe that it leads to segregation. This is because we know already that there are so many, in different countries, political parties are important, but they are still not, they're based on different opinions, and we do think that different opinions is extremely important. However, when it is based on something that you simply cannot change, then we believe that is negative, because it divides the people not only in their political opinions, but it divides people other places as well. It divides them in the schools, it divides them in the city, and we don't think that's a good idea because we do believe that, of course, different opinions is very important in a country, and that is freedom of speech, and we do believe that that's very important. However, we do believe that speech that is based on something you cannot choose is something that will lead to the segregation of the society. And we know that a segregation in a society is not a good thing, because when you segregate different people, they become upset because of things they cannot do anything, no thank you, anything about it. And therefore we do believe that there is a strong relationship, because just as we know that there's people, when they have political discussion, get really agitated. However, that is because of their different opinions and not because of the ethnicity. Because when you base it on ethnicity, that's changed, no thank you, that changes the whole dynamic of how the discussions go and how the politics is being developed. And therefore, because of this segregation, we know that when there is, because of course when you have a big ethnicity and there is always a majority in one country, then that majority that bases their political party on that, they will also most likely have the biggest political impact. No, thank you. They will most likely have a political impact because people will have a more reason to vote for their ethnicity that they come from. And when they do that, we are creating a society that they base their politics on something that will then be reflected. Then you have this upper group that will therefore get more benefits and therefore divide the different ethnicities, which we believe can even cause harmful effects further in society. No, thank you. And that leads us to our second argument, which is discrimination. Because, as we already talked about, we know that when you have these different groups, there is a majority and there is also minorities. And therefore, this is creating limitations, because of course the parties will use it for their own, because if they already decided that they're going to base it on their ethnicity, then they probably also have some sort of reasons for doing that, and that reason might be that they want to do something for their own ethnicity, which might lead them to discriminate, and this is the important part, discriminate the other minorities, because the minorities don't get this, the other minorities don't get the same opportunity to get into positions in parliament. Yes, please.
But doesn't the same thing happen if you only have the majority parties and all the minorities are then being forgotten about?
No, that's what we disagree on, because we believe that when you have a minority, because the difference is, and this is an important difference, is that when you base your political choice on a different opinion, that's completely fine. But when you base it on your ethnicity, then that means that this is not something you can change. And of course, it would probably be possible for you to agree with someone that bases their political agenda on their own, on another group. But we do see that that would be way harder, because of the fact that when you would then support another ethnicity and you wouldn't be different, that would be hard to probably also get into the political party and also be accepted in the same way. And therefore, we want to also talk about how we think that if we don't ban political parties that use ethnicity as the basis of their political agenda, we're actually limiting the choice and the democracy in a society. And the reason for this is because when there is this opportunity, and if that is being used, then that means that there are these groups that cannot join, and that's what the government sees as a really negative thing. Because, I'll take it in a second, because we also think that that can lead to people being really unhappy and have extreme groups that want to try and do things in a violent way, for example, to get to their, because they cannot do it through politics. Yes, please.
Man, the problem is that segregation of minorities already exists, and political parties are response to that. Political parties are agitated to solve that problem.
Well, this is where we agree, because we believe that there's other ways, that if there's discrimination of minorities, then there's other ways that that can be done. However, we do believe that if you have a stronger group, as a majority that is based on an ethnic group, that is something different, because what's happening is that this group is way stronger and is way harder to change, and that is what we do not believe is important, which brings us again back to what we're saying, is that when you feel that this is how the main political debates are going on, how the political agenda, how everything is being done, then that leads to some people being very unhappy. Because as we already said, when you're in when you're in a group and you simply, maybe there's not a political party that suits for you then, because everyone starts basing on the different ethnicities, then you don't have that choice. And therefore we believe that that is limiting the democracy, and we do believe that that can also lead to other things, because you need to get your opinions through, because the political system is simply not having the opportunity for you to get your opinions through, because there is no such thing that is actually representing you, which we don't think is good at all. And therefore we believe that by banning it, it's the government's job for the greater good for all citizens, to create a united States that can work together and not discriminate or segregate the society based on ethnicity. And therefore the government is proud to propose this motion.
We thank the Prime Minister for her speech and would now like to call upon the Leader of the Opposition to open this debate for the opposition side. Hear, hear.
Thank you for the floor, Madam Speaker. So what we here agree upon is that segregation exists, A, and we want to fight for the freedom of speech, B. So when it comes to segregation, my partner has already asked me point of information. Isn't it better to have representatives of the minority within the parliament to fight for their rights? Accepting the idea that we fight against segregation, we need to understand that for majority of society, it is not the problem of ethnicity. They feel strong within society because they are majority. They have more pressing issues such as economy, such as unemployment. But for minorities, it is the problem of segregation in preserving their identity. So when it comes to actually representatives of the within the political parties, we don't see that the majority has that much impact. And that is what they have never proven to us. And here's the example why it doesn't function. You have radicals within Serbian parliament that are actually not actually within the parliament because they base their program on ethnicity. Majority never votes for them because ethnicity is not the main problem for Serbs within Serbia. Some other pressing issues are, and that is why we see that political parties that strive for the ethnicity of majority don't actually succeed. Second thing we want to say to them is that freedom of speech is being limited by their actions, because if you can't hear the voice of the minority, then you're limiting the speech of the whole group within society, and that is highly problematic. If you have a segregated group within your society, you need to have representatives within your political discussions, within your parliament, and that is where we actually come to our first constructive part of the speech, and that is how do those minorities differentiate from the majority of the society and from the whole society itself. So when we are speaking about minorities, we know that they have different culture, different language, they have different identity. They preserve themselves, they perceive themselves as different from the rest of the society. The problem is that the rest of the society doesn't deal with their problems directly. That is why they are segregated within society, and we agree with that with our first government. The problem is that political parties that support ethnicity of the minority groups actually fight for those rights and deal with those problems directly. So when it comes to minorities, all they want is to preserve their culture, preserve their language, try not to be a lower class within the society. They want somebody to support their interests. And that is where we come to later. That is where we come to parliament and how does the leverage function within the parliament. So when you have a political party that fights for minority rights, they are not politically oriented towards democracy, towards right, towards the left. It doesn't really matter to them which side wins. All they want is to enter the parliament, and they make a coalition with any big party that would actually let them be within the parliament and support their rights. So when it comes to that, all they need is a little leverage to gain those rights. And we see that that is highly important here, because big parties will not care about minority issues. Big parties need votes to be that big parties, and they strive towards the majority of the society through economy, through dealing with unemployment issues. They deal with other problems of that society. But when it comes to minority issues, they only leave a small portion of their program or none at all. And that is highly problematic. If you have societies like Serbia and the problem of Roma within Serbia, problem of Hungarians in Serbia, we see that it is highly important for us to have a political party that will represent them. So the main idea of that political party is to include them within society. So when it comes to inclusion, we feel that just the idea that they are not politically oriented and the idea that they will not strive towards the left or right, they will just fight for that minority group, listen as a legit way to fight for that right. Before I continue, are there any questions? Okay, so it comes to a discrimination point where we see that within our society we actually have a minority that can't achieve themselves through their culture, through their language, through their identity. When they actually mentioned that by supporting one ethnicity issues, we will not care about the others. That is actually not true, because you have a lot of political parties that support different groups, and it is important to have that diversity. When you have a variety of choices, and you have variety of groups that support different minority groups within that parliament, we see that all groups are represented within that parliament. And when that happens, you have the big political party that supports majority through other issues and solves the general problems of the society, and you have a variety of minor political parties that support ethnical problems and that represent them and fight for their rights with their little leverage, because they bring those votes to big parties. And when it comes to parliament voting, big parties need those little political parties that support ethnical issues. And we don't see that the political discussions become more aggressive. But before I continue, because it's 5:40, are there any questions?
Well, what if, for example, it comes from when the minorities face that it comes from the government, and therefore they feel that they are being discriminated by the government?
Okay, but that is exactly why they have political party to represent them. They tell their problems to their political parties. Political parties are actually created because there is a support group for them. So you have a part of people who creates that political group, who supports that political party, and that political party represents the group that supports them, and that is how it functions. So if you see the problem of a minority in a group and you create political party, that political party will not discriminate the group that they are representing. And the reason why we don't see that the discussions will become more aggressive is because they don't have that big of a leverage to actually threaten anybody, but the big parties don't want to exclude them from their coalition, because they always bring extra votes and it is good for them. So when it comes to that, we see that little parties have some leverage to gain their rights, to gain something for their for the part of the society they represent. Big parties will include them, thus including all groups of society. And we see that actually freedom of speech is being benefited through not banning them and by letting them be represented. For all the reasons that we have presented you, please vote opposition. Thank you.
Thank the leader of the opposition for his speech. I would also just like to remind all the finalists that they have a red bull that says, please open me at 1 o'clock, so please open them at 1 o'clock. And now I would like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to further the case for the government side. Here, here.
We're here today is to present the clashes that so far came up into this debate, and then present our arguments, explain what was maybe missed or what needs to be filled in, and explain our third argument, which is blocking prosperity. But first, I'll begin with a nice explanation of what the government actually is trying to achieve with this policy. So basically, what the government is trying to achieve is form a country in which we will not have division among individuals in the population based on something that you do not have the right to choose. Because, let's face it, we don't have a right to choose whether we're going to be born with Serbian ethnicity, whether we're going to be born Macedonian, whether we're going to be born Croatian or whatever. We don't have a choice for this. How we're born, which ethnicity we're born, is how we're going to be labeled for the rest of our life. I don't have the right to go change this document and get another ethnicity. As far as I know, we don't have the right. Even if we do, society will still not accept us as such, but we will actually be stigmatized throughout our life for our ethnic descent from other parts of the population. So basically, why we want to implement this policy is because we believe that this ethnic segregation will have a major impact. On the division in the population, and with that cause a division that will be reflected in the political systems, that will cause delays in probably a lot of policies that the government wants to implement regarding anything, because there will always be discussions that will somehow be based on what one ethnicity thinks and what the other ethnicity thinks. Now the opposition might say, but this is exactly the point of politics. We're going to have one side that's going to have one ideology, and we're going to have another side that's going to have another ideology, and so on. Yeah, this is good. We are supposed to have different political ideologies, and this is exactly why we have political parties, so that people can choose the views that they want, go into these parties, represent their views, and then hopefully get their views displayed in society. However, what the problem is with political parties that are based on ethnicity, this means that if these parties are based on ethnicity, this means that they will, the main starting point for the development of their political ideology will most probably be based on the ethnicity of the majority of the group. So why we
point of information?
No, thank you. So this is why we believe that this policy should be implemented. To move on to the clashes that happened in this debate. First we want to state that what the opposition failed to recognize is that if a party is based on ethnicity, if its main basis is ethnicity, then this party most probably wants to achieve something for its ethnic group. And yes, they did mention this. However, what the opposition did limit themselves to is talking about the ethnic parties which will only be composed of minorities. So we were talking about minorities and how minorities need ethnicity, how we need political parties for minorities that will be based on ethnicity, because this is important, because this is the only way in which we will get the minorities to get into parliament and to get their views displayed and to get their voice heard and so on, so they get their rights and not be discriminated against. However, what we see as a problem here is something that the opposition said themselves. These minorities, these small political parties, will most probably not have the leverage to have an impact enough within the parliament to change the views of the major political parties, which, well, let's face it, will most probably be composed, since we have the right to get a party that will be based on ethnicity. These parties will most probably be composed of a majority ethnicity group, which will further on discriminate, maybe even more than there is discrimination now in the current political system that we have. So this is something that the opposition contradicted themselves on. Yes.
The current political system we have is a system where minorities can base their parties and can organize, and they're doing it through the parliament. You know, we have representatives of Roma who are fighting and have some success until now. So why do we ban that?
We believe that we should ban the ethnicity, not because of the abuse of power that will come from the minorities, because we see that minorities don't have the power to, they don't have any power to abuse in the first place. However, why we want to block this is because we want to block the major parties, the major ethnicities that will probably abuse their power, and further on discriminate. No, thank you. Because they have the right to do it, they can do it. and that not because of the minorities. And we think that we weren't offered from the opposition a proper explanation of how these minorities will actually benefit. No, thank you. How these minorities will actually benefit from these ethnically based political parties. But also, they never answered the question of what will maybe happen if we have a bigger ethnicity that's abusing their power to discriminate because they're just a big political party, which is a big part of the population. Thus, no, thank you. Thus, their representation in the parliament is in a much higher percentage than any other minority, which will not have the leverage to have an influence. Okay, to move on now to our third argument, which is blocking prosperity. What we need in a country that we want to prosper is the politicians of the country to cooperate. Now, of course, the politicians are always going to have discussions that are not always going to agree because we have a different ideology on one side, a different ideology on the other side. But then we want these politicians to be able to agree on something, to agree in a way that their agreement is not going to be blocked for months, maybe because of their ethnic background and because of their ethnic beliefs, so as to not delay the bureaucracy and any implementation of any policy that will somehow benefit the society through this blockage of communication. So, these politicians, no thank you, these politicians may constantly start small feuds between themselves and constantly drag themselves away from the issue by basing their discussions on the ethnic dialogue that they want to maybe proceed. But this ethnic dialogue will most likely, in most cases, lead to separation. Since if we have these political parties that are based on ethnicity, these parties probably want to do something for the ethnicity because they believe they have been discriminated against. They believe that they have bigger rights than they do, or they just believe that they have the higher right to be the majority, the major ethnicity that will have the most impact on everyone. Thus, they do not want to agree with Thus, they don't want to agree with anyone from another ethnicity. And I'll give a personal example that I had. When I was preparing a debate tournament here last year, I was sending invites to high schools throughout Mostar, and I was sending them in the local language. What I got back from one individual was, "Hello, can you please send me this document in a language that I can understand?" I said, "I'm sorry, did I send it in English?" The man said, "No, you sent it in Bosnian. I understand, but I won't recognize, so please send it to me in Croatian." Of course, I couldn't find the mistake. I can imagine how much this can cause issues in bureaucracy and how much of a slowdown it will have in bureaucracy if people need to translate every single small word so that every document needs to get everywhere, and how much people can be picky and annoying about, "Oh, this is in Bosnian, this is in Serbian, this is in Croatian, I don't accept, I don't accept, I don't accept." Thank you very much. We'd like you to propose.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech and would now like to call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue this debate for the opposition side. Here.
After this speech, we open Red Bull.
Yes.
I'm glad that the government side wants to create a world in which ethnicity doesn't matter. But the problem is they cannot say, we will say that ethnicity doesn't matter, and tomorrow we will all think that ethnicity doesn't matter, because we will still think that ethnicity does matter. There will still be, and minority will still have problems because they are an ethnical minority. Sorry. They'll never perceive us the true solution to their problem. Just they said that we have that ultimate goal, but never said how to reach it. Second thing, to rebut the point of prosperity. That first they admit that minority has some leverage power because they say that sometimes minority can block the decisions. Therefore, they admit that minority can have certain power, and we want that power. If some decisions are being blocked, that means that some decisions are not in the best interest of certain group of people, and therefore we should take into the consideration their opinion. And therefore, this is why we need this step of checks and balances in the parliament, especially when we have such differentiated ethnical population in the country. And if you just say that you cannot organize on ethnicity, Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks will still care in which language do you write their forms, and therefore you are not solving the problem. This is the way, by dialogue, and the dialogue through the institutions is the way that we can solve our problems. That will be our substantive point. But firstly, to rebut the things that we're still allowing freedom of speech, and we still then allow freedom to agitate for their rights, but just outside of the parliament. Well, the problem is that your voice values more when it is in parliament, because now your voice has some influence. When you argue on the street with your neighbor, your voice doesn't have an influence. Now your voice in the parliament can change something, and therefore we want your voice to have been heard in the parliament and to create some change in it. Okay, then to proceed with our substantive. What happens if we cut off the minority?
Point of information.
What happens when we let minorities fight on their own outside of the parliament? Well, minorities are, as Mika explained to you, are the special ones because they're different from the other culturally, and with the language and culture and all that, and also it's reflecting the other economic and social issues in their life. Therefore, they need to have a representative who will fight for their special cultural rights and their identity in order to later on they also improve their other rights. And that must be through the parliament. Why so? Because through the parliament we have institutions, we have the rules of the game. Now we have a rational discussion. We have a set of rules you have to oblige to. When you put parties, and you have parties that are a response to the problem, not to the cause of the problem. Parties are created as a response to demand. Demand for solving that problem exists, and therefore somebody has felt that it's supposed to be organized on the level of ethnicity, because ethnicity is the problem. That group has a problem because it is the part of certain ethnical group. Therefore, we organize a political party in order to solve their problem. What happens when the problem of that group doesn't magically disappear as a government would like to believe. Therefore, that group doesn't have a way of solving problems in the society, because majority doesn't have, just a second, majority doesn't have an interest to respond to their problems as such, and not just to respond by saying we will not discriminate you, but also minority, in order to improve their position, has to have some positive discrimination in order to not to be second-class citizens, but to reach the same level as the majoral ethnicity does. So go on.
Can you answer the question of how will we make sure that it's only going to be that minorities are going to use this potential for political parties based on ethnicity and not major parts of the population which are going to further on discriminate?
Well, we already explained to you, I will repeat it. For the majority, ethnicity is not an issue. Yes, we say to you that major parties can also let them organize on the basis of ethnicity and see what the voters will say. And voters are saying that we do not care about you because our ethnicity is not the main problem here. Such as a radical party in Serbia that based itself on the Serbian ethnicity doesn't even cross the census in the parliament. But what is important, why is it important even for radicals in Serbia to have based on ethnicity, or Bosniaks in Serbia to let them have political parties? So they will not find the other way to solve their problems. Because when they want to solve their problems on the other way, that's when they become aggressive. And that's when they attack the institutions, because institutions have cut them off, institutions have betrayed them. We have the opposite example of the IRA in Ireland, of course. IRA formed a political wing of their party, and therefore they left their terrorist traditions and therefore tried to fight for Irish interest in the parliament, and that's how we pacify the groups that have problems, but that group still can fight for their issues, and that's how we just also fight for them rights of the minorities and also do not create side effects of that fight. And therefore we believe that everyone has the right to freedom of speech. That speech has to value something. In order for that speech to have a certain value, it has to be through the institution, it has to be through the parliament, through that leverage they will have in the coalition, that bargaining power they will have towards the majoral party. And what happens if we cut them off to the institutions? They still have their problems, they still feel left behind, and now they feel like they are cut off from the entrance to the institutions. They cannot fight legitimately. Now they turn against that state because state is now their problem, and they tend to radicalize. And that's how we spark and enlarge the problem that still exists in the society. Therefore, we believe that by having parties that are based on ethnicity, we will solve this problem step by step. So we are proud to propose.
Thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for their speech, and would now like to call upon the government members to further this debate for the government side. Hear, hear.
Greetings, everyone. Today I will be talking about the role of the state and how the state correlates to the political parties. And before I pass on to my constructive bit, I have a few things to say about the opposition's case. First of all, they say that political parties are currently solving problems. But we have tons of examples here in the Balkans, in Europe, and in some states of America that gay people's rights, Roma rights, and other minorities are not represented properly. We believe that currently in these states, minorities are not represented because they are not as important as the majority, to which I will come very shortly. Minorities care only about their ethnicity, is what the opposition says, but minorities have the same problems as we do. Communal problems, economic problems, and we are not currently solving their problems because they are not as important to political parties, because they do not carry that much of votes, unlike the majority, which the political parties are focused on. Now, when they say that variety of choice is important, we do not cancel variety of choice. People will still have an opportunity to choose between different parties, but now parties will be representing all the citizens as they should be in these democratic times, and not only the majority because of the political points. And if we cut off minorities from the parliament, that is bad for them, as the opposition said, but we see that in the future, if we implement this change, they will still be represented, they will be, their rights will be fought for in the parliament, but by the big parties who can actually make a change. Yes?
But having Roma in Democratic Party is not the same as having Roma in Roma Party, because now his voice is lost in the interest of majority, and interest of majority to build bridge on Ada and not to build a city for the Roma.
Thank you, but we believe that if Roma people who are quite unpopular in Serbia, for example, form their own party, we believe that they will not be strong enough to make any change, unlike if they would join a bigger and more powerful party, which will represent them, and I will explain why that party will do that. Now I will proceed to my constructive bit and talk about all the state and its correlation to the parties. Nowadays, political parties are the state. They form the institutions, and the state is not anymore a depersonalized entity that should be altruistic. We believe that state must be altruistic, and it should work in the best interest of all of its citizens, which is currently not the situation in a lot of countries, for example, Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia. We believe that all people should have the same rights, and their rights and problems should be solved equally, even if they are minorities and not part of the majority, because they have the same duties as the majority has. They pay taxes, they do civil service, and why then aren't their problems solved? Why aren't their rights represented properly when the majority, who has the same duties and commits them as the minorities, is a lot better represented? We believe that minorities are less represented in the state and have less power in the state because they are few, because their number is not important that much, because when you have a minority that your nation consists of, say, 5% Hungarians and 95% Serbs, for example, you will not have that many Hungarians in the parliament as you currently do not have. You only have like 1 or 2 representatives of the Hungarian people who cannot make any solid change because they are so few and they do not bring any important decision. No, sorry. We believe that because of their number, they're not equally represented. We believe that political parties take care about the voters that bring them most votes, and that is the majority. If they, for example, say, in the example of Serbia, we will preserve Kosovo. They're not aiming for Hungarians because Hungarians don't care much about Kosovo, but Serbs do, and Serbs will vote for the Serbian Advanced Party that is currently in office, which is based on ethnicity and which is the ruling party in Serbia now. And they are not taking care of the minorities as they should because they do not have that incentive to aim for their votes. We believe that political parties should behave accordingly to the state, because accordingly with the role of the state. We believe that when you make a political agenda, no matter which doesn't matter what ideology you are, people are going to vote for you because you have the power. You are the strongest party, and you are offering now solving of the problems of all citizens. And now those citizens who would not normally vote for you would vote for you because they wish their problems solved, and that big party is able to solve their problems because it has the political power, unlike the minority parties who do maybe reach the census but they do not have any real decisions in the parliament, and they are not able to form the government. We believe that with the universal agenda, all rights will be fought for, rights of all the people, all the citizens in the state will be fought for, and the government will tend to solve their problems and to stick to their agenda, because now, instead of, let's say, 35%, you are aiming for 45% of the voters, because all the minorities now will vote for you, and if you do not fulfill what you have stated in your agenda, you will lose those votes. And that is very important, because when the political party loses its votes, it has a great chance of losing the office, because there are other parties who are more than willing to fulfill their promises. And a couple of hundreds of thousands or a couple of tens of thousands of votes can make a serious difference in nowadays society, where voting is not as popular as it used to be, and people are not as motivated. We believe that parties will now tend to fulfill their promises, because they are trying to stay in the office as long as they can, because the power is a great motivator for everyone, and including for the government. They wish to stay in office as long as they can, and they will achieve this by gaining most votes on the elections, and they will gain most votes on the elections if they stay true to their political agenda, if the people recognizes them as the problem solvers, and in this way they will have to deal with the problems and rights of the minorities. For example, gay rights in Serbia, which are absolutely not represented today. And there is not a single political party that deals with that. And if gay population would stand behind a certain party, that party would have the obligation to fulfill its promises and to fight for the right of the gay people who are currently, whose rights are not currently fought for. With this, I would conclude my speech, and I would invite you to vote for the government. Thank you very much.
We thank the government member for his speech, and would now like to call upon the member of the opposition to open this debate. For the last team yet to speak, the closing opposition. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, what Team Proposition has done here today is stood up and told you, this is how you should vote. This is how you should base your opinions. The previous speaker just told you that Hungarians should vote a certain way, that Roma people should be part of the big parties. Now, if Roma people want to vote as part of the big parties, we think they have the absolute right to do so. But if Roma people don't, then they have the right to vote for their own parties. This is because we, ladies and gentlemen, have a value of democracy. It's what us as a society says is the best way to represent everybody's opinions, and it's the best way for a society to work. And why is this? Because when people feel represented and people feel that the government is working for them, they're going to be more prone to wanting to work with the government and wanting to work with the society. So we think that democracy in this debate is incredibly important, and what the proposition is doing today is infringing on it. Now, you heard today that ethnicity, which is a core part of somebody's identity in today's world. I mean, this is why we have states. It's because ethnicity and identity are very important things. They told us that this shouldn't be important when it comes to politics, even though it's a core value in many people's lives. But even if you think that ethnicity shouldn't be related to politics, why is it that ethnicity is one thing that we can't look at? No, thank you. And economics is another. Because if you think about it, in the U.S., where you were born, whether it's the south of the U.S. or the north of the U.S., determines what your most of the time determines what your economic view is. And and the government should not be telling people how they make their opinions. They're going to make their opinions from their life, from their family, from their community, from what they read, and that's how they're going to vote. Because that's what democracy does, ladies and gentlemen. Democracy allows us to create our own opinions, no thank you, and it allows us to create our own opinions, and it allows those opinions to be represented in government. So what happens is, the propositions today wants to tell people that they should choose a certain way, I'll take you in a second, because that's what's best for them. But the proposition today doesn't really know what's best for them. Thank you.
We do not cancel the minority parties nor their right to choose. We just try to enforce the ruling parties to take better care of all citizens as they should and they're not currently doing.
First of all, without this ban, we still have minorities voting for majority parties. It's not that every single minority person only votes for their ethnicity party. And this is a world that the proposition has tried to show to you today, which isn't actually real. Now, also what's important to look at is that this ban is going to eliminate these minority parties, because we must understand that different ethnicities have different needs. If we take what the first opposition table is telling you in POI about Roma rights, whether there's buses from Roma villages, whether there's good Roma schools, it's not something that the majority of people will care about. Now this is because it doesn't affect the majority of people, but when you have a minority Roma party in government, what they can do is push these forward. And when they push this forward, the big parties have no reason to disagree. And it's also important to realize that just because two different political parties exist, doesn't mean that a majority party and a minority party cannot collaborate to make change, because they will collaborate to make change. That's what Parliament is for. Now, another thing is that if we only aim to have these big majority parties, we have what happens in the US, where you have the Democrats and the Republicans, and there was a government shutdown. The government stopped working because they could not come to agreement. Now, when we have different parties and different opinions and not just this big split, then we have many different ways and many different solutions that are coming. And it's not just a party versus another, it's a solution with many different parties backing it up versus another solution with many different parties backing it up. And that is a very important distinction to make. Now, we have to look today about why is it good to have these ethnicity governments in Parliament? Well, first for the people, because as we said, they accurately represent their opinions. And also because minorities will be able to, the minority and majority are able to vote for exactly who they want and who represents them more. And when people feel represented, as I said, this is going to make society run better. Now also we have to look at the politicians. What happens is when you are a politician and you are up front, you are being constantly scrutinized. You're scrutinized by media, you're put in debates, everything you do and your political opinions are on the foreground. And this is incredibly important because it creates open discussion. What we believe through democracy and through our governmental system is that when something is bad, there will be debate and there will be political issues to rectify that situation. And so what happens, no thank you, is when we have an issue in society, all the political parties are able to work together on it. But what happens is, and also, when we have these big ethnicity parties, what they have to do is be moderate. Because yes, if they are an ethnicity party, they still have to appeal to everybody because they want to the most votes possible. But what happens when we ban this? Well, first of all, it can't really happen because, because political agendas can be hard to identify when you have a ban on a certain aspect of it. So we saw in the Czech Republic when the Communist Party was banned, they changed a little bit of PR, they became the Workers' Party, and all of a sudden it's good again, except for now, you don't see the real agenda of the party up front. Now it's in the background, and when it's in the background and not under constant scrutiny, not in the open debates, this is where we have the issues. Because what happens is we still have the same people with the same intentions, they're just not presenting their real agenda to the government. So they're pushed underground, and this is an issue because then you have radicalization in parties, and since they no longer need votes and they're no longer experiencing this intense media coverage, they only need the support of a few politicians who are going to go in and represent them. And that's what's important, is that we now aren't seeing what's going on in government, and this is something that we really believe is important. And again, then we have the people who believe that the state is working against them, who believe they're not being able to be properly represented, and this is not something that's going to make society work. So that is why we beg you to propose.
We thank the opposition member for her speech and would now like to call upon the government whip to conclude this debate for the government side.
Can I close the door?
Yes.
But stay inside. Don't run. We need to do it.
Hello to everyone. I would like to conclude the debate and to tell you why the proposition won this debate, and show you the arguments. The clash, first the clash was the rights of minorities through different ways. The opposition are telling us that the better way is to follow the democracy and to have a person in parliament who will represent the rights of minorities. I will tell you now why that is not reasonable, not reasonable, why is that quite good enough. Because today's democracy is not the perfect democracy. Why? Because the represented majorities in parliament are not asked for anything. In that parliament they have 1 or 2 votes. With that votes they cannot grab their rights. They cannot do anything for themselves. They are like a statue in a parliament, and they are just there to, someone can point on them and say, here they are, we are democracy party, and so on. In that way we can rule and we can do our way, so nobody can tell us anything about democracy and majorities' rights. Okay, so second, in that way parliament doesn't fit. Second, I would like to opposite the first opposition when they tell that when they tell the majority group and minority group will go together and rule together. Okay, in parliament, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Why would any party who had the majority of votes, people are voting for them, they rule the country?
Point of information.
Okay, they will go to coalition because they have only 20%, and therefore they need a coalition to form the 50% of votes. And therefore 2 votes are extremely important for the majority party as such. And therefore that is the influence of the minorities.
Why are their votes important? Even they have the majority, they are ruling, they don't need anybody. Because ethnics in one state is the majority. They don't need any party to go to coalition with them. They won't have any rights. Secondly, how does the state works? Okay, the definition of the state, it's the state are representing their voters, their citizens. If you don't represent the minorities who are also citizens of the state, you are not doing the right thing. We need to represent and minorities and majorities. Okay, how we will do? We explained you that if we don't have ethnic parties, if we don't ethnic parties, minority would vote for the party they will represent their rights. How is that going to do? How the politicians work? How the politician team work? How the politician stay on the stay in the rule stay in the cabinet and so on? I'll tell you. Politician. We have three types of voters. The one who will always vote for us. The second one who is neutral, and the third party we will never get their votes. So we always aim to the neutral parties. In that way, just a second. In that way, the majorities could beat the neutral party. Why? Because we want their votes. No, thank you. We want their votes. If we have their votes, if we have like them like a group, if that is a group, I will represent them. I'm a politician. I like to rule. I like to be in the cabinet. I want to stay there for another 4 years. Someone is voting for me. In that case, I will give him his rights because I want his votes.
Sir.
No, thank you. I want his votes again. I want him to vote open. Again for me. So that is the technical system that works here. So the minorities, I told you the minorities. No, thank you. The minorities in parliament doesn't work because they're 1, 2, 5, 2-3% of them. They cannot have their rights. Secondly, how does it works? If we attract them like politicians, attract them and represent their rights, we will do that for them. The minority will be represented by majorities. In the way I already explained, politicians aim to do. No, thank you. Politicians aim to the group and represent their rights, and so on. They stay on the.
As politicians do aim for the large group of people that they're representing, if you have a minority that's only, let's say, 10% of the group, why would that politician focus only on that minority's rights the same way that a minority group could have a political party?
One problem, can you repeat it? You can't understand really.
If you have a majority party and the it has about, let's say, a 10% Roma population voting, then how are those Roma people going to get their voices heard if the politician is also trying to represent the other 90%?
Okay, in this case, as a politicians, they represent the voters. They represent the people who vote for them. So if you, like Romans, vote for me, I'm a politician, for example. If you vote for me as a group, I'm aiming on you. I will represent your rights and I will do things for you. So you can again vote for me. I will stay in cabinet. So I will continue to rule. You will have your rights, and this is so much better ways than to be in parliament like 1 or 2 people who cannot do nothing. So we should represent minorities through majority party, and that's so on. Vote for opposition, please. Thank you. Proposition.
I thank the government whip for his speech and would now like to call upon the opposition's whip to conclude this debate for the opposition side and the debate as a whole. Here it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, what the government failed to do in all of their 4 speeches and show us what is the systematic problem that exists that prevents the system from being self-checked and from correcting it into the position they want to have it in the form which there actually is, and that's why we believe that they should lose. So the first I'm going to talk about whether we need or do need these minority parties. Secondly, I'm going to talk about whether they can make a difference. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about if we want to have them in or out of the parliament. So first of all, we believe that we do need those minority parties. As the first government already, first opposition already showed you, they are different. Minorities are different, and that's why we need to be represented. What we showed you is that they do have these special needs. Like Roma minority, for example, lives in informal settlements, and there are no buses in Slovakia coming to these informal settlements. And these special needs can be very easily forgotten if they're not being represented. What happens, for example, is that many Roma children are being classified as special needs, and that special needs because they do not know the Slovak language because their first language is Roma, and that's why they cannot ever integrate into society unless the system changes. So what we need for these Roma people is that we obviously see that majority does not really care about these problems because they're too small to get their political agenda. We need these minority parties to go them and represent the party. Second of all, we believe that no thank you. No matter if we need them or not, we are not the ones to come and say, oh, you need these parties or you do not need these parties. We believe that the people themselves need to choose whether they feel like they want to be represented by a special minority ethnicity-based party or they want to be represented by a majority party. But we believe that because of the value of democracy, which is very important, because of the freedom of individuals, we do not have the right to step in and tell people what they should want and what they should need, because we believe that they are able to choose much better than we can. So now let's talk about whether these minority parties can make a difference. So first of all, what we told you is that yes, they can make a difference because there are these small issues that are only concerning minorities, like the buses to Roma villages, or problems with education in ghettos in black communities and or Asian communities or Latino communities in the US. And these issues would be forgotten unless there would be somebody pushing them forward because they do not influence the majority population. They only influence these ethnic minorities. So, second of all, what they said is that majority, what the second government said to you is that majority does not need minority, and that's why if they will if we have these minority parties, they will only do the majority decision. So, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you. If this is the world in which we live in, if the majority does not need the minority and we push out the minority parties, what happens is that even if they had some small representation right now because they had the 1 or 2%, what will happen is that they will not be represented at all if we go under the assumption that the majority does not need the minority. So we believe that they will lose no thank you any representation for the minority parties, which is not something that we want. However, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that in many cases that ethnic minorities are big enough for the majority to need them. So, so what we think is that in these cases they can push the small issues for just as minority groups, minority parties, because these issues aren't that big. And when it comes to big issues, we believe that ethnically based parties can cooperate on the big economical issues with the majority parties, which we believe is very good, because what it leads to is that these parties have to compromise. Because what happens in the US is that you have only 2 big parties, which is something that the second government wants, to have big parties which are going to represent everything. But what happens is that then the system is so split up that the parties will never be forced to compromise because they have their own agenda, the other side has their own agenda, and they will never never have to push their opinions to one side or another. And what we believe is much better is to have the variety of choices and force these parties to compromise. For example, force the ethnically based party to compromise because of the big party, or for example the big party to do something for the minority parties because they need their votes in order to pass some big economical reform, for example. But before that, yes sir.
We never stated that we want only 2 parties, and by the way, when you make a distinction between minorities and majority, how that helps the minority. If we make them a single group and have them all, we may...
Yes, I think I already explained that they went under assumption that the majority parties do not need the minority parties. So if they do not need them, they won't take them in. However, second of all, what we believe in is that it's not the job of the government to say what the politicians should do. We believe that every country is different and needs of ethnic minorities are different in every country, so the politicians can choose themselves. If they think that they can get more votes and push more issues forward, the system will make them join the big majority parties, and they are free to do so in the current system. However, what we see is that if these politicians and if the people behind them feel like they rather want to have a single party in which only their points of view are going to be represented, only then they're forming their parties, and we believe that that is good. So we believe that the self-control of the system, when the parties and the people choose what they want to do, is much better than the uniformed force control of the second government that they are trying to propose. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about whether it's better to have these parties in or out. So what do we believe in this? First of all, the government did not show us how can they effectively ban these parties, because how are you going to, how can you say whether the party is ethnically based or not unless they have written political agenda? So what happens is that the same thing has happened in Czech Republic. You can only rewrite the political agenda a bit and still run for the parliament. Still all the people in the party can be from the ethnic minority, and what happens is that those are the people that form the politics, not the politics that forms the people. So what is in the end going to happen is that these people can run for the same things, because you cannot say that no party can run for reforms for Roma people, for example. So they're still going to do the same thing, but one thing is going to happen. The system is going to be more messy. People will not know which party is representing, and we believe that this is something that we do not want. So what we believe it's much better to have them in and have them under control, because first of all, we have the scrutiny of the things. People democratically know and see what is going on in the parliament, and we believe that this is very important for the people to choose who they want to vote for. Second of all, we believe that because of this scrutiny, the parties are being moderated, because they want to, just as the big parties, and just as they would want to gain votes if they were in big parties, these small minority parties do want to gain as many votes as possible. And if they are not going to be effective in pursuing their goals, they are going to be ruled out of the party, because the people will, after all, see that they're not doing what they said to do. And second of all, we believe that they are being pushed to be moderate because they need as many votes as possible. And we can have this open discussion in which if something is wrong, if they go for wrong things or are doing their job wrongly, we can point it out, because we have them on national television every single moment. And second of all, people are being represented. So we believe that if we push them out, the only thing that's going to happen is that they still will exist, but they will radicalize, because they won't be able to work within the system, so they will have to work out of the system, which is something we do not want, because then cars are getting burned and people are going to protest. And that's why I'm proud to oppose.
We thank the opposition for their speech. We thank everybody who participated in the finals. The judging panel will now go and make a call. We'll let you know when we're done with the verdict.
You're still here, right?
Yeah.